My population focuses on mobility impairment, and that can be temporary or permanent. This population can have a decrease in mobility for many different reasons. The top four I have found is aging, congenital defects, trauma, and obesity. And because of this decrease in function, for whatever reason, individuals are at a higher risk for problems coming from being unable to do activities of daily living. So the size of this population in Weber County is 11.9%. In Utah, it's 9.1%. The United States as a whole is 13.7%. And worldwide, it's 15.4%. So there is that small 2% difference in Weber County and the nation. Um, a reason for this could be because of the weather. So colder weather can affect joints and just the body in general. And so these people may want to be in a warmer area. And also, I saw a study that talked about how a decrease in mobility leads to an increased probability of being homeless. And so, if these people calculated into this percentage are homeless, then most likely they want to be in a warmer area than Utah. So these social determinants of health were pulled straight from the Healthy People 2020 page. There was many that could affect those individuals with immobility, but I specifically want to focus on like the environment. And that could be sidewalks, buildings, housing and community design, work sites, school settings. Um, these things, if they don't have handicap accessible areas or wheelchair accessible areas, they can really affect how individuals with immobility problems get around and lead to a higher increase in problems such as like being unable to go to their doctor's appointments or being unable to shop for appropriate food to keep them healthy, um, being unable to get to work and make money. Things like that can cause a major problem for these people. And so these are the main core problems, but from these problems stem many more problems if individuals with immobility are unable to access the areas they need. And then transportation, if they are unable to drive, they have to have access to buses that have wheelchair accessibility or just handicap accessibility in general, or else they are unable to get around again. So the main factors that are the biggest concerns are economic and psychosocial. So the National Bureau of Economic Research talked about how there is a 79% decline when people return to work um, after a immobility problem. So a 79% decrease in earnings. So they make significantly less, and all these people that um, have immobility problems, many of them may not even be able to return to work, and so they do not have any income. And then on top of that, they may have to pay bills or hospital bills related to the trauma or whatever caused the immobility, and so they are having to output more than they're making, and that can be a huge financial burden on these people. And then psychosocially, just like really any change in our physical well being, mobility can lead to an increase in depression. So, Wilson, a study done by her and her team, they found a significant relationship between physical activity and depression. And also, Grossell and his team found with declining mobility, become there is a decline in the quality of life. So that is a very serious thing that we need to be aware of with this population to assess for depression, assess for things like that that can be also cause more problems than just what the immobility is causing. So the root cause of this comes from kind of the four same things that I talked about earlier: age-related defects, that's just normal wear and tear of the body; congenital disability, these people were born with this disability and have lived with it throughout their life; a musculoskeletal related traumas can be accidents that affect the body, that either can be permanent or temporary; and obesity, with the increasing trend of our nation becoming obese. Um, there are a lot of problems that stem from that, and one of them is the decrease in mobility, and they are unable to take care of themselves as well as they were before. And it also increases the rate at where their body kind of wears and tears on itself. With Maslow's hierarchy of needs, the whole population as a whole will be able to meet the physiological needs. Obviously, there's exceptions in that always, but for the most part, they will be able to meet the physiological needs. The problem comes from just the next tier up in safety. So these people, if they are living by themselves or they're newly diagnosed with this immobility or whatever is going on, they definitely are at a higher risk for falls or just for being unable to take care of themselves. They're at a risk for the employment for the resources they need. And so this is a big problem in this community, and it's important that these people have the right resources, whether it's people checking up on them, whether it's living with people, being at a home, so that they have those safety. And once that gets put in place, the next three really depend on where they're at in the grief state. It depends on if this is a new thing and they're really struggling with that esteem and self-actualization, or if maybe this is something they've lived with for a while and they've come to accept it and they've learned to have a great life just in spite of the immobility. So the last three is kind of 50-50. A lot may experience the self-actualization and esteem, and a lot may struggle with it, and it just depends on where they're at and if they're depressed or not. So specific concerns, the communicable diseases that can come from this are mainly just what we see from immobility problems. I work on the surgical unit, so these are the things we focus on after patients come back from surgery. So one is pressure sores. If people aren't moving a lot, they can get those pressure sores, which lead to infections and they can get bacteria that can be spread from there. They can catch it from other things and can make their condition a lot worse. So that is definitely a big concern, and we want to make sure that these people are moving around, and if they are unable to move at all, that they're being turned and watched for these sores. And then also respiratory infections, just like after surgery when your lungs kind of have become lazy is what we talk to our patients about. They need to be walking around as much as they can or moving around as much as they can, and if not, using like incentive spirometry or something that gets those lungs moving, because they definitely, if they're struggling with immobility, they're at a higher risk for those respiratory infections such as pneumonia. And this was taken from an Asian study done by nurses, that these were the things they focused on with immobility, and the problems they found came up most from immobility. As far as non-communicable diseases, it's not so much that people with immobility get these non-communicable diseases. It's more so the people with these diseases experience immobility. So people with cerebral palsy, muscular dystrophy, heart defects, spina bifida, these were taken from AIP.org. These diseases are more, these non-communicable diseases put individuals at a higher risk for experiencing immobility. The main thing I could find is osteoporosis, or just like muscle density loss within the body when you're not moving around. It can highly affect the structures of your body. So as far as self-care and self-harm, Gleason and his team in a study, they say there's a high risk for suicidal ideation in many individuals that live at rest homes. But they rarely see the self-harm coming from them. So it's mainly, we're worried more about the depression. And obviously, it's not so much the immobility that leads to self-harm, it's the depression from the immobility that leads to self-harm. So it is something to be watched for. But we worry more about self-care. So are these people getting the hygiene needs? Are they able to shower themselves, clean themselves, take care of themselves that way? Are they able to get food and make food for themselves and get the nutritional needs? Are they able to have normal activities of daily living? And take care of those on their own, or do they need help? So self-care is definitely a bigger problem in this population, and it's one that needs to be assessed for. And then last of all, as far as risk for harm by or to others, there's really no evidence pointing to the fact that this population is at a higher risk for harming others. That's completely like an individual thing, and it has nothing to do with the population as a whole. But the population is at risk for caretaker abuse, or elder abuse is really common. And this is something that when burnout happens by caretakers, they can neglect or abuse the individuals that experience the immobility issues. So this is definitely something that we need to be aware of and watch. And last slide is just my references of the studies I found that add to the points I've made about immobility.